Well, the issue of how best to protect sex workers is one which divides political parties. And joining me now is Nikki Adams, who's been a sex worker since her 20s, and she's spokesperson for the English Collective of Prostitutes, and Aisha Hazarika, former special advisor to Harriet Harman. Nikki, would decriminalisation make you feel safer in the job you do?
Very much so, and it's actually been introduced in New Zealand in 2003, and they did a very tough scrutiny of what actually happened there. They found there was no increase in prostitution and that sex workers were actually much safer. They were more able, crucially, to be able to come forward and report violence to the police because they no longer feared arrest in that way.
Aisha, if you want to keep women safe, you've got to listen surely to the sex workers who say they want decriminalisation, haven't you?
I think you have to listen to a kind of a range of voices, and I think there's no easy answers to all of this. I think we're all agreed that the protection of the women is the most important thing, but there are lots of sex workers and women who are exploited by sex work who don't have a voice. And actually, the Home Office research into this shows that so many women that end up in prostitution start when they're children. They have come from very chaotic backgrounds, often sexual abuse, being in care, drug addiction, alcohol addiction, mental health problems. Do we think it's okay as a society to say that we should legitimise the exploitation of these very young women?
That's the point, isn't it, Nikki? I mean, when you look at the Nordic model that Michael mentioned there, criminalising the purchase of sex reduced the amount of trafficking, which is surely a good thing when you think of a lot of these very young, vulnerable women and girls trafficked into the prostitution industry.
Well, that evidence was never proven that it actually reduced trafficking in Sweden. And in fact, there's been a lot of misinformation about trafficking. People have said that 80% of sex workers are trafficked, and that's just not true. It's a lie. Only 6% of sex workers were found to be trafficked in recent research. But I think the crucial thing is that where trafficking does exist, it should be treated. There's already a law against trafficking. There's a law against rape. There's a law against many of the things that people say. There's a law against exploitation. And our problem is that the prostitution laws actually prevent those crimes being tackled because people are underground, illegal, actually made to work in more dangerous situations because you can't even work with a friend from premises without being prosecuted.
Sex workers aren't safe at the moment.
Well, they're not safe at the moment, and I don't think decriminalising is going to make them any safer. I mean, this is already an industry which is underground. I mean, what would it look like if it was overground? I think the sex buyers law, the Nordic model, is something worth looking at. I think it looks like it's targeting the demand, which is a really important issue. I think it helps to change public attitudes, and I think it will help sort of reduce the amount of trafficking. At the end of the day, we don't want our daughters or our sisters to be going into this profession. A very small number of women do it by choice, but lots and lots of people are doing it because they're very exploited and vulnerable.
But that really isn't true. It's not true that only a small percentage of sex workers are doing it by choice. Women make a decision to go into prostitution like I did, like thousands of other women like me, because...
Is it what you really wanted to do?
Well, it's because you make a decision about what job you go into in the same way as a lot of other people do. You look at your options. You know, I wanted to be a firefighter when I first started out, and I faced a lot of discrimination. I went into prostitution because it provided a higher wage than a lot of other women's wages, and it gave me a flexibility that I wasn't going to get. But
it was never your plan A, it was never your dream job.
Well, I don't promote prostitution. I would never go around saying it's a great job. It's a job like many other jobs. It's often the best choice out of a set of bad choices. But I think the thing is if you do want to reduce prostitution, then do something about the circumstances that force women, mainly mothers, into prostitution. One thing we know is that 80% of sex workers are women. Many of those are mothers. If that was the central fact, you'd end up dealing with benefit sanctions, dealing with the benefit cap, poverty, homelessness and debt.
Okay.
And that would reduce prostitution.
Is sex work always exploitation in your view?
Look, I think it's fair to say that a lot of women who go into prostitution suffer post-traumatic stress disorder. Your chances of being raped or murdered go through the roof if you become a prostitute. And I think let's just look at the cases we've seen in the news, the grooming cases in places like Rotherham, where very, very young girls were groomed for sex work. Are we saying as a society we'd be happy for the men who groomed them to be able to live off running brothels where they were legalised prostitutes?
But that wasn't sex work, that was rape. And it should have been dealt with as rape. And the crucial thing about what happened in Rotherham was that the police didn't act against the rape of young girls. You have to distinguish between the two. Yes, it's true that violence is high in sex work, but let's tackle the violence and get the prostitution laws out the way so that you can actually get to the root of the problem.
OK. I'm really sorry, we have to end it there, but fascinating conversation. Nikki Adams and Aisha Hazarika, thank you very much for joining me.